Welcome everyone to the second session of day one of HumData 24. I'm very, very honored to introduce Sarah Cohn here today. Sarah is a consultant, facilitator, and evaluator devoted to fostering greater cultural competence and responsiveness in the communities that she works in. Sarah is compassionate, curious, and relational, and believes, I'm reading it. One of her greatest contributions to clients is in her role as a facilitator of nuanced conversations. I know this to be true because I have had very nuanced conversations over the years that we have known each other and been friends. I feel so honored that she is here to share her talent and her expertise with us today in this session using data to support thinking and planning strategically. Sarah also co-developed team-based inquiry, which is available from a link that I will drop in if you're curious. This is a practitioner-focused form of evaluation. She also co-wrote Team-Based Inquiry, a practical guide for using evaluation to improve informal education experiences. I feel like we can all relate, especially because this is something that councils do incredibly well with their programming. So without any further delay, thank you, Sarah, for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'll share that as Teresa, shares the link to the team-based inquiry guidebook, it's also some of what we're going to frame some of the tools and resources that I'll be providing you all with today. Because it's a really useful framework that helps us understand how to apply data to actually thinking and planning strategically and understanding what kinds of influences or impacts we might be having on the communities we're seeking to serve. So I think we'll be sharing a lot of different resources with you, and everything will be available at the end as well as in the lobby of this event. So really briefly, yes, I am one half of Aurora Consulting. My background is in evaluation. And I was at the Science Museum of Minnesota for 10 years before going out on my own with my business partner now, Al Anka. And we use data, we use information, we use feedback as ways of helping us think about change, whether that's within our organizations, within our teams, within our boards, within our broader communities and society. So really thinking about how do we use data to inform our practices is sort of a lot of what we do. And I'm really excited to have in the last hour, 11th hour, roped Rebecca in to talking a little bit. I'm going to sort of throw her on the spot a few different times, but is there anything you want to share about yourself, Rebecca, and HumanitiesDC? Is like a little intro. And you're on mute. Yeah.
I wasn't prepared for an intro. Hi, everyone. I'm just curious and excited to hear the process. And as in talking with Sarah before, I am very nerdy when it comes to strategic planning and other kinds of planning. So when I had the opportunity to join you all in this, I got really excited. So yeah, I'm excited to share and see where the conversation goes.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And I imagine that a lot of you will have insights, experiences, questions coming from, the reality of all of this, of running your Humanities Councils. So please feel free to throw things into chat, to raise your hand if we have that ability, and to come off mute and share things. I do have a lot of information that I want to sort of run through, recognizing that this is recorded and it will be available in an ongoing way. But I also want it to be a little bit more than just me talking at you for almost an hour. So briefly, the sort of way that I'm thinking about this, in the description that Teresa and I came up with was this question of how do we use data that already exists to understand progress so far, right? So maybe we have surveys somewhere on your hard drives or in a shared drive. Maybe we have folders of information from 3 years ago. How do we use that to help us understand where we are right now, if we're planning for a strategic plan in the future, and where we are in relation to any kinds of plans or goals that we've set for ourselves in the past if we haven't really sort of intentionally connected those two things. So we're going to use that as a framing, and I'm going to present this in sort of two chunks, the sort of grounding in around what do I mean when I say thinking, planning, acting strategically, and what is data and evaluation really briefly. Don't start sweating with that term. And then action, right? Turning it into action, connecting data to our strategies, to our goals, to anything that exists in plans that we have if we didn't do it sort of from the start. So let's get a little of grounding on what we mean when we talk about thinking, planning, acting strategically. I'm going to share two of my favorite frameworks for why and how we do what we do as organizations, just as a way to get everyone on the same page, because I don't know all of you and all of the things that you do within your work. So thinking about strategy first, Simon Sinek wrote this book, Start With Why. No, well over a decade ago, that really caught my attention. And I think about it as it's a really helpful model for understanding how we connect our aspirations with our actions, right? How to connect our work to each other's work within our own unique roles within our organizations and councils, and to the communities that we seek to serve, using this sort of three rings of why, how, and what. So you see in this description that the why is our purpose. It's what our cause, our mission, what we believe. How is the process, right? Taking specific actions that we take to help bring our why into life. And then what are the efforts or the products that come from that? What do we do, right? It's the result of why we exist. In a lot of corporations, this is easily flipped in the opposite way. I create computers. This is how we do it. Do you want to buy one? Sort of a brief piece of some of what Simon Sinek says. I think nonprofits and Humanities Councils, you all in particular, do this really well at really staying true to your purpose, and starting with why is helping us drive everything that we do and how we go about doing the work to serve our communities. But sometimes these things get a little shifted around as we're going about completing the work of the business of being an organization and doing all of this. Through these three circles, we're more and more clearly articulating our purpose, not just what we do or how we go about it, but why we do anything at all. And there's a link. I don't think I shared it on this slide. I will share it with you after. Something that he says in the video, it's a 12-minute video on YouTube, is that people don't connect with what you do. They connect with why you do it. And so what we do simply proves what we believe, right? So making sure that we are using why as a way to help us frame our actions. Oh, yeah, okay. I'm looking at my notes now. Yeah, I said it all. Okay. So then the second model that I use and I like to share with organizations is the nonprofit development life cycle. I really like sharing this as a grounding for a lot of discussions with organizations, as a way of relating the difficulties we might be experiencing with growth and development, as recognizing that there is a bit of a pattern across nonprofit organizations and organizations in general, but nonprofits in particular. At each phase of our development, we have different challenges facing the organization regarding our sustainability, our momentum, our growth. And at any point in time, the different areas of work or our staffing and capacity and internal systems within our nonprofits might be at different places as well, right? We might have a huge team, but some of our internal systems are just trying to catch up with everything that we are doing. So if we place that set of why, how, what, those circles on this chart, we need to grow with purpose. And we need to have a plan for what we want to produce or what we want to sustain. And our goals, the different areas of focus, what aspect of our work and our mission we're trying to roll up that hill to get to the top, and sort of to maintain a balance between the demand that we are experiencing from our communities and everyone we're seeking to serve, and our internal capabilities, and just how many parts of the candle we're burning at the same time. We're trying to find that balance, right? And imagine and inspire, right? We're just trying to create something and say, is my dream something that is resonant with others? And in Found and Frame, we're saying, okay, it seems like it's resonating. How do we make it happen, right? The demand is huge, and we're trying to just build as we go. The focus then within our council's creations could be just seeing if these things resonate and are able to gain traction on their own. And ground and grow, or produce and sustain, the needs and the questions and that balancing act is a little bit different, right? What we focus on and what we strategically develop or advance in pursuit of our mission, in pursuit of achieving the visions that we have for our communities and for society, is then going to change over time, right? The piece of that rolling ball that we are pushing up the hill and then trying to hold at the top is going to be a little bit different over time. And the questions that we have for ourselves, our partners, our communities will thus be a little bit different. So we're talking about thinking, planning, acting strategically. And those are sort of two different models about how we think about this in a big picture way and over time. But what's the difference between strategic thinking and strategic planning? This is a quote that I really appreciate from Digital Leadership. Strategic thinking is a continuous and dynamic mental activity that envisions the future, identifies opportunities, and fosters innovation. While strategic planning, in the second paragraph, is a systematic process that translates that thinking into actionable plans. I'll let you read the rest. So in this description, then, strategic thinking is something that we can develop. It's a skill that we can strengthen, and it requires practice. Breaking that quote down, strategic thinking is continuous and dynamic. It's thinking about the future, identifying opportunities and space for innovation and growth. And it's really focusing on creativity, adaptation, being proactive in our thinking and our imaginings of what's possible, given the position we are currently in, the role that we play within our communities, and then being able to set the course to climb the hill and clear those clouds, in my little photographic metaphor. Before we sort of run forward, Rebecca, I wanted to pause because in our little conversation yesterday, you talked a little bit about using strategic plans in particular, but I think in some ways I heard it as like, I am a strategic thinker. I'm always thinking about what am I building towards? How do we as a team, as an organization, really think about where we're headed while we're doing the steps that we're doing every day? So I just wanted to pause and say, how is this landing for you? And is there anything, that you'd share?
Yeah, I appreciated you separating the two to be able to think about them individually and how they work together. Because the first thought in my mind was, both strategic thinking and strategic planning are very important to an organization. If you don't do the thinking part, you can't kind of do the brainstorming and the big picture and the exploring. And if you stick too hard to a strategic plan, that might stop you from seeing opportunities that pop up. But also, if you're only thinking and you're not creating the plan, then it's very hard to kind of actually build a strong foundation that is ready for whatever opportunities might come up suddenly. So kind of this thing that it's not one happens first and then the other. It's kind of how can they happen together simultaneously in an ongoing cycle. So neither gets in the way of the other, but actually are supportive of one another. So when it comes to the actual strategic planning, I do like to think about, and until you said this, I don't think I even realized it, but how to create space in the plans to be okay with the innovation stuff that might pop up. And since, you know, lots of us have different brains that work different ways, and we're in an organization where there's multiple, you know, there's tons of us, some who like to think very plan oriented and some who like to think very, you know, like big dream oriented. How do you create something that allows space for both to feel comfortable in moving forward?
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, for folks who joined a little bit after the intro, I'm just putting her back on the spot a bunch of different times. Thank you so much. So that really, yeah, that segues really well, because the next part that I was thinking about is, okay, here I am talking about strategic thinking, and we're talking about planning, and I know that even if you just have your task list for today, all of us have some sense of like planning forward a little bit. How are we going to spend our time? Maybe it's all the way to a 3 to 5 year strategic plan. Maybe it's a weekly plan. But planning is critical to our sustainability and our ongoing success, as Rebecca was saying, right? And planning is the process. That previous quote shared that strategic planning turns our thinking into a systematic process of setting goals, identifying measurable objectives to see how we are doing on our path, identifying strategies or steps that it's going to take us to get there, and then allocating the resources to do it. All back to our why, all in the pursuit of our mission. So here are lots of different types of plans we might have. There's the organization-wide plans, which are our mission, our vision, values, if we have them, and then a strategic plan, which, you know, is more time-bound. And as the sort of font gets smaller, so does the sort of scale and focus of all of these different kinds of plans that we might have, right? There are a million different ways to create plans, and just as many ways of thinking strategically around them, right? And all of them are to serve that purpose of getting closer to achieving our mission. And as I like to say, working ourselves out of a job. But let's connect these things together, right? That why, how, what we do with different forms of plans. So this is a terrible slide. I apologize, but I wanted to merge the two. As we think about those different spheres of how we talk about our work, how we think about and wrap our arms around our work, you can see where those different types of plans might live, right? As I said before, nonprofits, organizations really are good at saying why we exist, what our purpose is, what our mission is, and to be able to expand on that a little bit. And then some, you know, within that center circle would be shared organization-wide goals, whether that's a strategic plan, a multi-year vision statement, on the way into our mission. And then those other pieces would be further out, right? Because they're more around how we do what we do, the major initiatives that might cross teams or departments, and then particular programs, our grant portfolio, our events. We are going to focus in on strategic planning because in many ways it rolls up all of these different types of plans into one big picture. And because I think a lot of us are either in the midst of, you have one, maybe even it lives on a shelf, but you have one, or maybe your council is thinking about creating one, revising, creating one anew. So I'm going to use that as the way to frame how we talk about using data to connect to our efforts. But you could think about it across all of these as well. So because we're going to talk about strategic plans, I wanted to give you a general overview of the way that I think about strategic plans. At the top, we have our big picture directions, our key priority areas. These are the things that are statements that are large in scope. They will take a significant amount of effort and time to achieve. And then within each one below that are more detail, right? Sub items that give a little more detail at each layer to how we are imagining what those directions, what those priorities are going to take to be achieved. And it might get even more detailed than this. As you go down, the statements get smaller in scope. They might be called actions, tactics. I have objectives, initiatives here, tasks, anything else that gets from across our councils. This is the direction we're heading in the next 3 years, what we're focusing on for sustainability and growth. And then getting down to the detail, we might get to what Sarah is working on in the next 2 to 3 years, or what one team or department is working on. As you move from the top to the bottom of a plan, then you're moving from statements that are broad, stable, and shared across your organization, across the whole team, to statements and actions that are detailed, flexible, and more specialized, right? And each effort, the specifics of what you're trying to complete, to change, to develop, whatever the elements are of these plans, will have outputs. Right? What comes of the work that I do every day? What are the things that are resulting from my effort? Did we complete an event? Did we award all of the grant funds in a given cycle? Did we send out enough? How many communications did we send out? Unlike outputs, which are really more connected to those bottom layers of what someone or a team is working on, every level of a plan can have outcomes, our influences or our impacts on our communities, on our members, on our customers, however we think about that. Outcomes for our participants, grantees, communities, even the organization are possible across all of this, because these are the things that are setting our efforts and helping us frame and understand what we're trying to do. And each of these outcomes then can be measured. We can gather data about them. We can gather information to understand if these things are coming to pass as they relate to the change that we want to see from our efforts. So Rebecca and HumanitiesDC was willing to share their most recent strategic plan as an example. And I just took some screenshots of their plan to share here. On this page is sort of, I think, their big priority areas, and then some of the specific goals that are within each one, right? So if we connect it to, my little hierarchy of stuff, right? We have priority area number 2, public programming, would be that big box at the top, right? And then goals, objectives, and then strategies would be those subpoints underneath each one. So you can see how those different layers of a strategic plan map onto this layers of and hierarchy of broad, stable, takes a lot of time and effort, all the way down to the details of what things might look like year over year. Rebecca, anything you want to share about this and how it supported the full team's thinking and strategy?
Well, I guess later on I'll tell the little bit of the story of how this one came to be and why it's a little unique. But right now, let's see. There's this is the external version of the strategic plan that anyone can look at. Our internal version then continues to go deeper into those objectives or tactics and into our metrics of how we measure out each one. So that thing that Sarah kind of laid out before, that is within the internal plan. We just want to overwhelm people externally with all of our information. Sometimes I've seen strategic plans only go to this level, and I always find that it's a little hard then for all of us to visualize how the work actually happens. So I appreciate having a strategic plan, even though it's a lot of work at the beginning to lay all that out, even if that's not the direction you end up actually going in, even if that's not the metrics that you keep, that at least it really paints the fullest picture possible of the vision you had at the beginning as a group.
Thank you. Okay, so that's all of the grounding around thinking, planning, acting strategically, and then getting to sort of using a strategic plan as the framing for thinking about how are we applying data to our work. So now I'm going to shift to data and evaluation. And it's my understanding that you all, it's not my understanding, it's my knowledge that you all are collecting data, regardless of whether you know you're collecting it. Like we are, as human beings, taking in information, synthesizing it, making decisions, taking actions all of the time, right? That is, and all of that input is stuff that we could call data if we wanted to. But specifically to humanities, and I'm just using random pictures of things that include data in some way. Information about grant applicants and recipients, numbers of attendees at events, the nature of your partnerships and program or grant portfolios, all of that can be considered data if you pose questions about what you're doing, who you're serving, and where all of that may be leading you. And if you're like most of the nonprofits that I work with, you have participants, staff, partners, others' data that you gather and then do nothing with, right? So I do want to pause and note that for a moment as we consider this. As we talk through the rest of today and as you're going through this conference, I hope you're able to consider whether the information that you're asking others to share with you is always necessary, right? If you can't name how it's going to help you better understand something or complete other aspects of your work or reflect on your efforts, consider stopping, both spending the time asking about it and trying to make sense of it, and for others to be sharing it with you. Back to all this data, right? A wall of books, it's information. Data may be insights, opinions, and experiences from people and organizations that are engaged with you. It might be information gathered to track progress, improvements, or achievements. Data can provide us an understanding of how our programs and services affect individuals, organizations, and communities, which can, if we spend the time turning data into information and then insight, help us better understand our impact, improve our programs and services, better support the community, and ultimately achieve our mission and vision, right? But data requires our attention and our curiosity to shift from being responses in a form to information that fuels our discussions and then insight that might drive our decisions, right? So shifting data from just being piles of surveys, whether they're on your desk or in your computer, from being a member database full of information and cells that you keep having to enter all the time, or artifacts from an event, to being able to be turned into learning, insight, and action in this flow of movement, will require intentional process. And I think about that process as evaluation, as that's my background. But you might just think about it as part of program development, annual organizational reflections and reviews, not individual, but collectively, how are we doing? Board reporting and oversight, or something else entirely. In case some of you are getting warm under the collar or stress with adding the term evaluation, I want you to sort of pause and take a breath. I think about evaluation in very easy ways. As I was saying, like we're all collecting data. I feel that same way about evaluation. It does not have to be enormous effort that requires a ton of resources. What I'm hoping to offer you today are some more bite-sized ways of thinking about what information do we have our hands on that can help us understand where we are now and what our progress is. We engage in evaluation every day. So let's just use it to our benefit by being a little bit more purposeful in the process. Right? We consider our options, we make decisions to act, whether we're at a restaurant or deciding to turn off the alarm and get up or snooze it one more time. We consider our resources, we move in one way or another, which includes not moving, not doing anything. The important piece of all of this is that it's a process. Evaluation requires us being consistent in our information gathering so that we can look across everything and know that we are comparing apples to apples, right? I am asking the same questions after the end of my event as Rebecca's asking at the end of a program, as Teresa's asking at the end of, a grant cycle, so that we know that when we're looking at that information, people are responding to the same question. So here is the process, stripped of as much evaluator speak as possible. And this is that team-based inquiry cycle, and described in ways that connect with that natural process, right? We start with our questions. We do not need to gather or review information from the outside world. If we don't have questions, we can't answer ourselves, right? Like all of this is because we have questions that we think maybe someone else has information, insights, data of some sort that could help us answer the question more thoroughly. So we take our question and we go and investigate, exploring what information we might be able to collect that could help us answer this question. Then we collect it, we pull all of that data together, and we review it, reflecting on what we're seeing across everything. And then in step 4, improve, we take action. This might be improving efforts that already exist. It could be making a decision on what to do next, identifying what our gaps are and creating our next plan, or making recommendations for suggestions, either to the organization, to the board, to community members. And often we end up having more questions. You see that circle, that arrow ends up making it a circular process. Sometimes those questions are the same, right? We know more, but we still need additional information. But more often they are different, more nuanced questions. Now that we have more knowledge and insight than where we were when we started, we have additional questions we want to explore, and we begin that process again. So it's cyclical. Ideally, we can start with a question. We could start at the beginning, but we can hop into this swirl anywhere in the process. So today we're starting here, right? We have data. Let's use it. Let's apply it to questions that we now have. Yes, the investigate portion maybe didn't happen on purpose in the ways that might be ideal, but we can look at the information that we have now and help us answer some of those questions and begin again. Teresa shared the link to the team-based inquiry website, and this, I'll throw into chat, is also a direct connection to the guide itself, not the website with the more materials. Okay, so now we know we have data. Fantastic. We just don't totally know what it might say or mean for our work. Also totally okay. We also have plans, strategies of some kind. Great. We just might not know what our progress is to date. So let's connect them by taking some time to make sense of the data that we have and what it might tell us about our progress with all of these different pieces. Okay. Just like these motorcycle drivers are turning all of the data about what it means, all of their sensory inputs into action on the road, we're going to review a series of steps and tools to move you from having data to having information and insights and knowledge, and then more confidence, hopefully, to being able to take action based on what you have, or having a better sense of now knowing what your gaps are and what you don't know. So briefly, the 4 steps we're going to move through are first this identifying the data that you have, then figuring out what data actually helps us understand what the progress is that we have against our goals, pulling all of that information together and making sense of it as a team, and then turning that into decisions and action. Okay. Each one of these, I'm going to be providing a resource. I'm going to be putting a bunch of links into the chat, and I believe there should be links on the screen. I'm hoping they're live for you and you can use them, but if not, I'm going to be throwing them in the chat as well. So the first step is identify your data. So using your Mad Lib fill in the blank, today we're saying strategic plan, as a guide, identify all of the data points or data sources that your team already has. This is a 12-point list, 13-point list of ideas for what data might be, and there are plenty more that aren't on here, right? Maybe you have surveys, questionnaires, feedback forms, back and forth email exchanges about various things. You have observations from different events, from different team meetings, artifacts from various efforts that you've done over time. You can look at your budget. You can look at your partnerships, right? Depending on what the thing is that you're trying to understand your progress around, right? The way that we're thinking about this session is, what's our progress to date? And how can the information that we already have help us understand that? Consider all of the different places that you have information that you could turn into being data that can be reviewed. Another document and clarifying model that I understand a number of you might have for your work is a logic model. If you're having trouble thinking about what data you might have, look to your logic model. If you're using a logic model in some way or moving through your efforts around programs, events, various products, various experiences, various even grants, grant cycles, you may have a sense of what you're putting in, what you're hoping to be done, what happens, who participates, who's involved, and then what the outcomes of that might be, right? You might then have information around all of these areas of the logic model. Whether it's just about the progress that you've made in completing something, the number of attendees or viewers, or what's resulted from whatever it is you're thinking about. Make a list and make that list as long as you can. Sometimes useful information is hidden in unlikely places. Because once you have that list of possible data, we are going to turn that into figuring out what sources of data are going to help you understand your progress to date in relation to your goals. So in this second piece of Investigate, the team-based inquiry guide provides a worksheet that helps you connect your big questions to the appropriate data collection methods. Since we're hopping into making sense of data that we already have, I modified it to help you connect your existing data sources to the various components of a plan or of the goals that you have for a given effort. So this worksheet is intended to be filled out for each area of data that you have, each data source that you think might be useful in understanding your progress on something. The set of questions at the top helps us then explore whether each data source actually has information that might be worth exploring, and then helps us understand what it might take, right? What are the resources needed to clean all of that information up and to be able to sit down and look at it individually or as a team. And then when you're looking across all of the potential areas of information, which one should you focus on first? And in case that link is not working, there you are. I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to keep giving you tool after tool after tool. So you have all the data, and now we have to review it. Gather it and review it. To have a group review information to identify patterns and themes, somebody might have to spend some time running basic synthesis, right? Creating some tables or charts, pulling all of the quotes together, looking at your database and pulling, right, how many grantees there were over the last decade, how many are recurring. I'm making things up. I don't know how grant portfolios work. But to be able to then, as a group, sit down and take some time looking at it, reviewing it all together, identifying things that stand out, that feel, I'm sorry, I try to highlight my own sheets, that feel particularly interesting, are curious, they have questions about, feel important to understand. and then turning it into what are the themes and patterns? What are some of the percentages? How commonly are these things occurring? To get to categorizing and summarizing. Here's what the data tells us as we think about what is the progress that we've made so far. And this takes time. And I said at the start, like this takes requires our attention, curiosity. This is the time that might be hardest for all of us as we may or may not be used to looking at data. And this is just to make sense of a big pile, right? A big pile of information. And then we're turning it into action, decisions, action, knowledge, wisdom, if you will, about sort of what are the state of things within our organizations. Is kind of a different conversation. I think I gave you the same link again. Yeah, let's try this again. So in the previous step, we look at the information to say, what are the themes, right? What are some of the patterns and themes that we're seeing that help us understand what the progress is? And then sometimes you can have these conversations together. Sometimes we need a minute. Somebody else is going to go through everything and categorize and pull out the percentages, show us what the change over time might be. And then turning all of that into making sense of where we are now. Could be a second conversation. The key here is to, as a group, name what the data say about what has changed. So this tool highlights what's successful and what requires improvement. And maybe that's not the right set of questions for you, right? Maybe your questions are what's complete and what's still in progress and why is it still in progress? Why didn't we finish it? Or maybe the question is, what is our baseline? What can we understand about where we are right now? And what are our gaps in our knowledge around that? What do we have to go in and gather more information around? So these are a bunch of, I didn't make a summary image, I should have, but these are a bunch of steps to get from, I know we have information and I know we have a lot of information across our organizations, to saying, great, let's apply it somehow. Let's think about a question. Let's think about a particular area of our work and see how it might inform our understanding of where we are today before we start planning for the next 3 years, or what's changed since we made changes 2 years ago. I'm going to pause here and just see if there are questions from folks. Feel free to write into the chat or come off mute, raise your hand. Anna, please.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. All right, I have a question. So, we've been doing this kind of data work, but then we hired a data scientist, and he's been telling us that what we were identifying as trends were not statistically significant. So he's basically saying, yeah, you can make these claims, things look like they're going up, things look like they're going down, but your numbers are just too low. And you're getting yourself into like messiness by trying to make meaning out of data that's not actually meaningful, and it's not helping us move forward. So how do you, if you don't have a data scientist, right, which was our situation up until recently, how do you recommend thinking about that?
That's a great question. I appreciate it. So I think, so this framing is really around, sort of like what can our information tell us and give us a little bit more insight than we had before. I think when you're getting to points of exploring statistical significance, we're at scales that are much bigger than how I think about how do I apply feedback and immediate insights to my day-to-day practice. right? When we get to statistical significance, we're trying to make arguments to a broader, perhaps a broader audience. And that could be true, right, in some of the areas of your work if we're trying to make asks for greater funding for grants or programs. At the same time, if you are able to gather information from more than a third of your participants in given things, probably more in the grant portfolio, right? We want like 100% responses on those of who are receiving funds to do things. But program participants, event participants, if you're gathering information from the majority of them and we're seeing shifts, then we know that some of our efforts are having some kind of influence. And I think the big shift would be around the kinds of claims that we're making of we are having an impact versus we believe that we are having an influence on the participants who are attending these things. I'll pause there and see how that lands for you, Hannah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think that that's helpful. And, I'm always interested in the intuitive meaning of data. So it makes sense to me, but I just,
Yeah.
Our data scientist basically looked at the data linked to our strategic plan and he said, it looks like things are going up and down, but I wouldn't actually use this to make decisions, and that was, we really had to like step back and be like, oh no, okay, well then we won't do that, but yeah, it's definitely the intuitive sense of what's happening is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's like a tricky spot, right? When I think about data scientists and this is part of why I sort of shifted in my own profession to lowercase e evaluation. Like I want evaluation to be able to be used in real time, right? To inform our efforts and help us make decisions a little bit more thoughtfully beyond my own brain or beyond, my internal team to getting feedback from participants and community members. When we're thinking about statistical significance or broader statements about impacts, there are caveats to what we can say, but it's better to use this information to help us understand and revise a strategic plan than it would be to not include it, right? There's a slide that I hid from the slide deck, which is an old quote from Jim Barksdale, CEO of Netscape. I don't know where my business partner found this quote, but Netscape is, I don't know, that feels like a long time ago. But Jim said, if we have data, let's look at data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. Right. So like, I feel like, yes, we might have huge gaps in the data, but having anything is probably better than just having our own opinions about, having more than just like the team's thoughts on something, unless we're starting from zero and starting from scratch and let's build and then see how it goes. Michelle asked, could you share more about what kind of claims we can make if our participant feedback is less than the majority of participants, right? Or what our guidelines are for how to share these results responsibly? Yes. So it is rare, unless it's a requirement of participating in something to share the feedback. It's rare to get the majority of participants responding to an interview, an exit survey, a follow-up emailed survey, what have you. And so when we're writing and reporting about these things and sharing them more broadly beyond sort of internal teams who might have a better sense of that sort of in the review process, naming that at the outset and then saying, right, so like this might be a limitation of this information. We heard from 35% of participants, and those 35% shared this. In terms of sharing the results responsibly, I think it's really, sharing that framing and offering what the limitations might be, which is usually around the the percentage of respondents, the areas of the gaps of information, right? If we know that we're missing a whole swath of an audience, we only talk to people who had toddlers who were not crying, or right, adult only audiences in an event or something, we can say that. Especially if you frame and also in addition to any observations that were made or ticket sales or any other stuff that you had. Oh, good. Thanks, Teresa, for capturing that. So this should send you to a folder with all of the resources that I provided. And I also want to open it to Rebecca to talk more about sort of what this looks like in reality. And you can talk about, there are a lot of things I feel like Rebecca could talk about, but I'll just let you share a bit about, you know, how you made sense of data and reality of HumanitiesDC in that first year of being executive director, or what this most recent round of strategic plan and using metrics and data has looked like. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Sure. So I think, and it's interesting, I've seen these presentations, I've been part of these presentations before, and they always sound like there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. But realistically, the organization's already existing, it's already doing something. So it's having to do this type of work while you're also already working with what you've inherited, or, you know, just doing the day-to-day. So being conscious of trying to think about the work as it, and how to take in the evaluation and how to use it to make decisions while everything else is going on. So for me, the story I had shared is that I became executive director 3 years ago now. And the first year that we started, the organization had been through so much transition. And I think this might be something that happens to other councils at times. I don't know, being that they're all 40 years old, that sometimes you're going to have like restarts. Is that when we first started, there was no strategic plan and there was no data that we could easily go through, which does bring me to another point in the future, is thinking about archiving data and evaluation material so that people in the future who want to look back and understand it for whatever decision making can actually access it easily. So anyway, so we had nothing to access. So we did create, instead of feeling like we had to create a very, very in-depth plan that defined everything right away and all that, we actually created a 1-year plan, which is kind of unusual for a strategic plan. It was just a 1-year get us going type of strategy. And that was just to give us something to work with. And then that's what we could, within that, we already started building in some data collecting. And so that we could, in the second iteration, the second strategic plan, which was only 2 years, and that's the one that just finished, we could begin to incorporate that data into it and into the decision making. But again, because we didn't have a perfect tool yet, and this idea of kind of perfect tools or perfect analysis, I think is also something to kind of let go of a little bit, because it's just always a work in process. But because we didn't have that, to Sarah's point, it was being kind of creative and thinking about all the pieces of information that came in. And so I really liked that we talked about surveys and budget to really be able to put side by side kind of what people are saying with what is actually possible at that moment. And then also including capacity into that, so that every conversation that includes evaluation is already including on top of that capacity and budget, so that you don't feel frustrated that that you can't just fully listen to, or that you want to fully listen to the data, but actually it's not all possible in the moment. So within this 2-year plan, we were able to start folding some of that in. And we were able to, I think, successfully have a strategic plan that we followed really nicely, that everyone followed, we returned back to, and recently just celebrated the completion of. And by celebrating, I mean actually went through it and said, look at all the things we checked off. But I did admit that the metrics that we added to it were kind of messy. And they were kind of messy because we didn't know what was what yet. We had inclinations, and that's what we went with. But knowing that at the beginning was kind of giving ourselves a little bit of grace, that those metrics may not be the metrics that actually work and that we were going to pivot. in some of those, and that was okay. And that has to be kind of a message across the organization, so we're not overly stressed that we're not meeting a goal that actually maybe is not the right goal. Now we've just finished our creating our third strategic plan, and now our conversations are so drastically different, both in creating the strategic plan and what are the things that we're going to use to measure kind of where we're moving forward, and all that. I still think that metric should be a little bit like wiggle room so that you can keep learning and respond. But the conversation's so different, and now the meetings that we have kind of to see where we're at really do have some data built into it, because we now have 2 years worth of ongoing surveys that we've been able to collect information. So that's what I mean by like everything is still going on and growing and happening as we are also strategizing, planning, and collecting evaluation materials and surveys and going through them and digesting them. So hopefully that was a helpful, real example of kind of the messiness of it, the slight messiness of it, and being okay with that, while still feeling like we really actually succeeded quite nicely by the end.
Were there any pieces that you can, any examples that you can speak to about like what changed in the middle? And examples of like, well, we set some metrics, we set some goals for ourselves for shifts, and knowing that, it was kind of like just seeing change is what we're going for, right? And having to shift it.
Sure. So in the 1 year, one thing I was tasked with by the board was that we didn't have any public programs occurring yet. They had all kind of gone quiet during COVID and transition. And so the board wanted to see them come back up. And I had, to the point, I had no input to help guide me. And I say me at that point because the actual organization hadn't been built up yet. And so we had a very small staff. We didn't have much guidance into figuring out what programs. So we came up just with ideas, and I came up with a few ideas of what we thought might work. And went far enough with those ideas to kind of get some feedback on whether they would make sense, lay out what a budget connected to them might look like, do a season of something or what have you, but knowing that it was piloted. And so that gave us that little bit of time, that year or two, to then get that information back and be like, oh yes, this is going to work. We're going to run with this. And oh no, that was a terrible idea. We're going to, before we went too far in it, before we got too attached to it, we're going to let that thing go. So there's some programs that rose to the top and then some that didn't. And then that also left a little bit of space for some surprise programs like our community journalism program that came as an idea from a fellow. And like that was just not on our radar, and now is really kind of becoming an anchor program. So giving ourselves that opportunity to try a little and not delve in deep or not get super attached, and then get feedback, and then being like, okay. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are just at 4, maybe 4:01 Eastern time, which it means that we are at the end of this session. But I wanted to thank both Sarah and Rebecca for being here, being so generous with your stuff and your time and your things and your ideas, and invite everyone to go to the lobby, which I included the link in the chat, where you can continue to drop in your questions or thoughts about what you just experienced, and also as a place to kind of debrief if you want to, with myself, or Zainab will be in the lobby as well, in between this session and the next session, which starts in a half an hour. So you could take a break before the next session. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you so much. The recording will be posted momentarily after we trim the front of it. And also do let us know by filling out the 3-question survey about this session, so we can get a better understanding of how useful you found this, and what you're thinking about in terms of moving forward with applying some of the tools that were shared. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your conference.
Thank you.